Hello, hello. One second. All right. Hello, Mark. Hello, Anton. Good to see you. Okay, let's get started. See a chapter of Psalms over here. המנצח מזמור לדוד, יענך אדוני ביום צרה, ישגבך שם אלוהי יעקב. ישלח עזרך מקודש ומציל יסודך, יזכר כל מלכותיך ועולתך יידש נסלה. ייתן לך חיל לבביך וכל עצתך ימלא. נרננו בשורתך ובשם אלוהינו נדגל, ימלא אדוני כל משאלותיך. עתה ידעתי כי יושיע אדוני משיחו, יענהו משמי קדשו בגבורות ישע ימינו. אלה ברכב ואלה בסוסים, אנחנו בשם אדוני אלוהינו נזכיר. המה קרו ונפלו, ואנחנו קמנו ונתעודד. אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ביום קרינו. Okay, hello, Liora. We will give some charity now together, for those of you that you have. If not, I'll have you in mind. And we'll get started. Okay, so tonight's class is an interesting class because it's a little bit contemporary to what's going on. I'm sure any of you that have been following the news a little bit have seen a little bit of the politics that go on in Israel regarding the ultra-Orthodox draft law to the army and their protest about it. And, you know, sometimes I just had this discussion Sunday. It gets a little confusing because, in other words, it seems like obvious. Well, everyone should join the army. Everyone should join the war. You know, there's a war, an existential war against Israel, and everyone, everyone deserves to be joining equally. So we're going to see tonight. The Rebbe was a big supporter of the IDF soldiers. He prayed for them. He blessed them. They visited with him. So we'll see over here what the Rebbe's approach was, and to be able to see, it's very important, and this is what people have to remember. In every argument, there's always two sides. One side might be more right, the other side might be less right, but there's always two sides. If you can see the other side, you're not a good judge. Because there's always two sides. You always have to see the perspective of the other side. If you can't see the perspective of the other side, means you're biased. Somehow you're biased. You're not appreciating the other side. So tonight we're gonna mainly focus in the talk that we gave, mainly focus on the IDF, the importance of joining the IDF, but we'll see also where the other side is coming from, or at least their perspective. Now, their attitude might be wrong, but their perspective they come from somewhere. Their perspective is somewhere. Anyways, this is just a little introduction. Stop talking around and around. We'll just get into it. But I want to ask you to give me the time tonight to just listen. Let's listen. Don't like that. Even if you have a very strong opinion either way, which is fine. Tonight, let's just live. We're not. It's not a political class. This is a purely Torah class. We'll talk about it from a Torah's perspective and see, if this perhaps enlightens things, gives insight on a topic which is definitely very painful and whatever. But again, let's focus on it from a historic Torah perspective. This talk was given right after the 6-Day War, talking about the miracles that happened during the 6-Day War, etc. Okay, so without any further introductions, let's get started. Anthony, you want to give us a start? You sure over here? Okay, you should be able to see from Deuteronomy.
Mm-hmm. When you go out to war against your enemies, and you see horses and chariots, a nation more numerous than you shall not be afraid of them. For the God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt is with you.
Okay, so we go out to war, which this is said back 3,000 years ago, but very relevant thing because Israel's at war. Don't be afraid of them, because Hashem who brought you out of Egypt, He is with you. Okay, go ahead.
In recent months, a remarkable event has taken place, a divine revelation that transcends the ordinary order of creation and cannot be explained through the normal workings of nature. The proof is that, to this very day, all the peoples of the earth remain astonished, unable to understand how such an extraordinary event could have happened.
Okay,
Now,
stop, pause. Okay, so
yeah,
this is an unbelievable miracle. It's an unbelievable miracle. The nations of the world, that this talk is from back then, are stunned at this unbelievable miracle that happened. No,
now, Torah scholars also have a share in all this, as evident from the teaching in the Talmud.
and this is a Torah perspective. The Torah scholars that were sitting and learning Torah during the Six Day War have a part in the miraculous victory of the Six Day War. Right? How do we know this? So we're going to go back all the way in history. We're going to go back all the way to the Talmud and even further back into the Torah and see what does the Torah tell us about. Remember, we I'm going to go back for a second, Anton. We learned in the first verse, right, in Deuteronomy 21, that Hashem is with you. We're going to talk about that Hashem being with us has to do with Jews learning Torah as well as the Jews going out to war. It's a partnership. Let's see what this partnership looks like. Go ahead.
Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said, if not for King David's Torah study, Joab would not have succeeded in battle, and if not for Joab's battle, David would not have been able to study Torah, as the verse says. David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and charity for all his people, and Joab, the son of Zeruiah, administered the army. How was David able to administer justice and charity for all his people? Because Joab waged war. And how was Joab able to wage war? Because David was administering justice and charity.
So the Talmud says if King David didn't sit and study Torah, Joab would have won the wars. But if Joab didn't win the wars, David wouldn't be able to study Torah. They needed each other in order to have a successful country, right? A country that just studies Torah, you're not going to win wars because Hashem told us we have to do our natural part. Hashem is with us, but we have to do our natural part. We have to train in the army, we have to fight, we have to have bombs, missiles, everything we need to fend off the enemy, to attack the enemy, whatever we need to do. At the same time, it says in one of the prophets, if Hashem doesn't guard the city, 1,000,000 soldiers won't help. It's only if Hashem protects the city. How does Hashem protect the city? By having Jews study Torah. So you need both. As we see from the Talmud, David, which is the king, and Joab, which was one of the greatest generals in our Jewish history, needed each other. If not for David, Joab wouldn't be successful. He was the greatest general. He wouldn't be successful. If not for Joab fighting the wars, David wouldn't be able to study Torah because there would be enemies attacking. He wouldn't be able to study Torah. You need each other, and only by having each other do you have a successful country with a king as powerful as King David was and a general as powerful as General Joab was. Okay? Now we're going to take a look at the Torah and see how the Torah talks about such a partnership in a different area of two people doing two totally separate things, a scholar learning Torah and a businessman doing business and supporting the Torah, and how it's also an equal partnership. Similar to this idea of war where you have the Torah scholars and the soldiers, you also have it in business. You have the business people and you have the Torah scholars, and it's also a business. And this actually talks about in the Torah. So let's continue. Mark, if you want to continue. Just unmute. Yeah, good.
This is similar to the partnership between the Torah scholars and those who support Torah study, which was first pioneered by Issachar and Zebulun. Zebulun's success in business came through the merit of Issachar's Torah study, while Issachar's ability to devote himself to Torah was made possible through Zebulun's support.
Okay, we're going to continue to see it in the verse.
To Zebulun, he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in your goings, and Issachar in your tents.
Okay, go ahead, Rashi.
Zebulun and Issachar entered into a partnership. Zebulun lived by the shore and went out on ships, engaging and earning. Zebulun then provided for Issachar, while the tribe of Issachar devoted themselves to the study of Torah. For this reason, Moshe mentioned Zebulun before Issachar, even though Issachar was the older, because Issachar's Torah study was made possible through Zebulun's support.
Okay. So we have over here that in the same verse, give me a second here. Do you hear me clearly? Am I clear? On my chat? No, clear? Okay. If I get choppy, I don't know why I only have 2 bars here of my Wi-Fi. If I get choppy, Anton, just tell me so I could disconnect or reconnect or something. Issachar and Zebulun were 2 brothers. Now, generally, in Moses' blessings, Moses blessed each one separately. Here, they were blessed together in the same verse because they were in a partnership. Zebulun went into business. They made money. Issachar studied Torah. The partnership was, you, brother, and the tribe, go study Torah. We'll go to business. We'll support you, but we'll also take a part in your studying of Torah. In other words, the reward that Hashem gives for people who study Torah, we'll take a part in it. And who comes first in the blessing? The younger brother. Even though the younger brother is younger, because he's the businessman, but he's the one that supported the Torah study, he becomes even more important. What's more important, making money or studying Torah? Studying Torah is more important than making money. But because Zebulun's whole making money was in order to support the Torah, his money became even more important than the Torah because it was enabling the Torah, right? So here was a partnership. Both of them wouldn't survive. If you're just in business without Torah, your money is not worth anything. If you're studying Torah without money, you can't study. You have no food, you have no shelter, right? Together it works. They're both important. And if you want to go even deeper, the business they're both very important, right? But the business gets even on a higher rank and gets mentioned first before Issachar, which studied Torah, which is a beautiful concept. And we're going to apply, the Rebbe will apply it in the talk also to the concept of soldiers and studying Torah. That without people studying Torah, the soldiers can't be successful. Without the soldiers protecting Israel, Jews can't learn Torah. You need both of them. But then when it comes to shove, and you need to know who to mention first, who's even more important? The soldiers are even more important because they're the ones, through fending off the enemy, they're the ones enabling the people that study Torah to learn Torah. Yeah, so Mark, if you want to read this next part. Well, Zebulun.
Well, Zebulun and Issachar are dependent on each other. It remains unclear which takes precedent until the verse clarifies. Rejoice, Zebulun, in your journeys, and Issachar in your tents. The verse mentions Zebulun before Issachar, teaching that Zebulun was given precedence over Issachar because Issachar's Torah study depended on Zebulun's support, even though Zebulun's success in business came through the merits of Issachar's Torah study. It follows that those who go out to battle take precedence over those who study Torah, even though their victory in battle comes through the merit of Torah.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Right, so there's no question that there's a real important partnership. And really, when you have 2 partners, it's not really important who's more important. You need both of them. One guy's the strategist, he knows how to do strategy. The other guy knows business. Yeah, they're both important. One without the other, the business would fail. But if you ever get into a real, heated debate, and you need to know who's more important. So the Torah tells us that the businessman is even more important. Again, only by little, because they're both very important. It's like 45 and 55%. It's not like the big gaps. They're both important for this business deal to work. But if you need to put one before the other, Zebulun comes first. And the same thing the Rebbe is saying here, that when it comes to war, you really need both of them equally. Both of them do an equal job. One brings Hashem into the equation, another one brings the physical tactics that we need. However, if you need to put one first, we're going to put the soldiers first, as we'll soon see the Rebbe says, because they're the ones that actually go on self-sacrifice. Lior, if you want to continue. This
highlights the extraordinary greatness of those who go out to battle, risking their lives in the most literal sense in order to fight for the unity of Hashem, as Maimonides describes it, and especially when fighting a mandatory war, a war fought to defend the Jewish people against an enemy attacking them.
Right, so this is the greatest of those people that go out to war. of a mandatory war, a war that's there to protect the Jewish people from an enemy.
Maimonides concludes his discussion by describing the immense reward granted to those who go to war. Whoever fights with all
1 second. We skipped a paragraph. You didn't skip it. The slideshow skips. I'm just going to read it quickly. The wars fought by the Jewish people fall into two categories. War of mitzvah, which is a mandatory war to fight against our enemies, and a war of like a permitted war, which is to expand territory or like. There's two different types of wars. Okay. And in other words, sometimes the king especially back in those days, if you wanted more land, you went out to war. That's called a permissible war. Then there's a mitzvah war, right? A mitzvah war, which is to protect us against enemies, or as we'll soon see, to conquer the actual land of Israel, not expand the borders, but actually the land of Israel. Both of those are considered a mandatory war. And this is where we continue. Maimonides concludes that saying the immense reward of anyone that goes to war. Okay, continue, please.
Whoever fights with all his heart, sole intention is to sanctify Hashem's name, is assured that he will suffer no harm, no evil will befall him. He will establish a lasting house in Israel. He and his descendants will merit an eternal legacy, and he will merit the life of the world to come. As it is said, Hashem will certainly establish a faithful house for my master, because my master fights the battles of Hashem, and the soul of my master shall be bound in the bond of life with the Lord your God.
Okay.
To whom is this the right page?
Yeah.
To whom is this great reward promised? Not to the Torah scholars whose merit brings victory in battle, but specifically to those who actually go out and fight.
So there's a tremendous reward that we just read over here that gets the world to come, and nothing bad will ever happen to him, and his soul will be bound up with my master. So who is that? The people that go out to war. Now again, we said the Torah scholars are very important. They are. It wouldn't work the war otherwise. Nonetheless, these special rewards go to the people that actually go out to fight. Okay.
We can suggest that the unique distinction of those who actually go out to war, even beyond that of Torah scholars, is the reason why King David not only studied Torah, whose merit aided Joab in battle, but also personally went out to fight. It was only later when David's men made him swear, saying, "You shall no longer go out with us to battle, so that you do not extinguish the lamp of Israel," that he stopped doing so.
So fascinatingly, David understood the greatness of going out to war, and he went out to war, and he was successful. But his people said they knew how holy he was, they knew how powerful a study of Torah was. They made him swear he's going to stop going out to war, because if he gets killed, they're not going to have this giant studying Torah, which is protecting them in war. So therefore, even though he wanted to go out to war, because he knew the great merit and mitzvah and reward for going out to war, he also understood, and his people forced him to swear that he's not going to do it because they needed his protection through studying Torah, which is fascinating. And this is what, I started off the class with saying, people don't realize when you downplay somebody else, it's never good. The soldiers, as we just read, are on the highest pedestal. They get the reward and everything else. But don't laugh at the scholars studying Torah. The only way that Israel is able to be successful is because we have Hashem on our side, right? Otherwise, we would be long gone. We're a tiny nation. We're tiny people. Let's say, they say that in West Point, in the American Army school, it's called West Point, right? Whatever. Anyways, the American Key West, whatever it's called. So they were studying there, and they gave a whole, presented a whole bunch of battles, strategy, how to do battle. And there was a Jewish student there, and he said, "Why don't you have any Israeli wars?" He said, "Because over here in this school, we're trying to teach strategy. Israeli wars are miracles. We don't teach miracles in our school." That's right. We have to realize that it's the blessing of Hashem that wins the war. It's not the IDF that's so powerful. Why does the IDF have success? Because there's Jews studying Torah. So if people are downplaying and laughing at the Jews studying Torah, you're laughing at your own defense. we just learned from King David that the people made David swear that he's not going to come out to war because they needed him to study Torah. Yet, who's greater? The soldiers are greater. If you want to talk which one's on a higher pedestal, the soldiers are greater because they're the ones actually fighting. They're the ones actually going in self-sacrifice. They get a higher reward. David wanted to join the army. They told him he can't. He was the king, but they told him, we don't want you here. We want you back home studying Torah. But the whole idea is fascinating because sometimes we, in our minds, in our small human minds, we have to choose one or the other, right? Either he's right or he's right. Sometimes they're both right. They're both a little wrong. They're both a little right. In other words, they're both important. Right? We're going to see over here that this talk of the Rebbe putting up the soldiers on a very high pedestal, some of the right religious people didn't appreciate his talk because they were very fixated. And again, this is not a mistake only that I'm sort of tying it into today's because we're all familiar with it. It's not just that the IDF and the left or the secular or whatever Israelis want that the religious should join the army and they're not appreciating the religious people. Those ultra-Orthodox are not appreciating the soldiers. It's a two-way street, right? So the reason why the secular or the left or even some of the more center right don't appreciate the ultra-Orthodox studying Torah is because they don't appreciate Torah enough. They don't realize the great value in studying Torah. They don't realize that their whole victory is only because of Hashem with them, and for that you need Jews to sit and study Torah. At the same time, the ultra-Orthodox are missing the appreciation for the soldiers that are actually giving up their lives and actually going out to war. They're missing that. They're missing that tremendous value. Again, it's a mistake. It's a tremendous mistake. They blame it on the fact, well, they're not religious and all these other things that are all mistaken notions. But when a Jew goes and self-sacrifice to protect other Jews, that puts him on the highest pedestal, even higher than the Torah scholars. And they need to respect that, right? So after the Rebbe gave this talk, it made headlines in Israel. And there's a lot of religious newspapers that came out against the Rebbe, that how could the Rebbe be talking so highly about the Six-Day War and the soldiers that fought in the Six-Day War? They're secular. They don't deserve Hashem's protection. Oh, a bunch of silly stuff, right? But the Rebbe the next week at the talk spoke about it, answered all the questions, and the Rebbe wasn't one to fight. The Rebbe wanted to explain to them and sort of enlighten people what the mistake is. So we'll get to study together and we'll see what their problems were and where they were trying to poke the Rebbe. So it says, it's not true. This is not. You're painting a picture of these holy, righteous people in IDF. They're not really holy and righteous. So the Rebbe took sort of question by question and spoke about it and answered it. So we'll get to look at it. Okay, Leo, I'll let you continue a bit. Modern mandatory. All right.
Is it possible to have a mandatory war in our times? Some ask how it is possible to speak of a mandatory war today. They point out that according to Jewish law, a mandatory war requires a Jewish king to lead it. The appointment of a king requires the authorization of the Great Sanhedrin of 71 judges and the instruction of a prophet. None of this exists today.
Okay, so we're going to have to do some Talmudic studying and just unpacking all this. That some people say that the concept of a mandatory war, which in Hebrew is called a war of mitzvah, and therefore you're fighting a war of mitzvah, you get the highest reward, isn't applicable today. Why? Because in order to have this type of mandatory war, you need a king. And today we don't have any kings. And we'll continue reading how there's 3 mitzvahs that the Torah gave us, and they have to happen in order. And before that, we can't do one before the other. Okay, so let's continue reading. What are these 3 mitzvahs? From Maimonides.
Maimonides. Okay, the Jewish people were commanded to fulfill 3 mitzvot upon entering the land of Israel. The first one is to appoint a king, as it says, "You shall surely appoint over yourself a king," Deuteronomy 17:15. The second one is to wipe out the descendants of Amalek, as it says, "You shall erase the memory of Amalek," in Deuteronomy 25:19. The third one, to build Hashem's chosen house, as it says, "Seek out his presence and come there," Deuteronomy 12:5.
So in other words, there's 3 mitzvahs that happen in order, and they have to happen in order. Oh, 1 second. Okay, we're now let's I didn't we're not done the Maimonides. Let's finish reading the Maimonides.
The appointment of a king should precede the war against Amalek. This is evident from Samuel's charge to King Saul. The Lord sent me to anoint you as king. Now go and strike Amalek. 1 Samuel 15, 1-3. The descendants of Amalek were to be wiped out before the holy temple was built. As it says, the king dwelt in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him. The king said to Nathan the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells within curtains." 2 Samuel 7:1-2.
So it was like this. Based on this, the Torah gives thing that in order to fight a mandatory war, you have to have a king. And it works like this. You have a king. Afterwards, you can fight mandatory war, which wiping out Amalek was one of them, but there's other mandatory wars. For example, to conquer the whole entirety of Israel, but that only applies when we have a king. And after that, you build a 3rd temple. And because we don't have a king today, we don't have the Sanhedrin today, the high court in Israel, therefore we don't have the right to go out for an obligatory mandatory war. If it's not a mandatory war, we don't have Hashem's protection. That's what they claim. So how could the Rebbe say that the IDF today is so important and they're going fighting, in the name of Hashem as a mandatory war? There's no mandatory wars today. They continue arguing. Let's, Anton, if you want to continue.
The Rebbe. They add another argument, albeit an unusual one, as it is not based on deep analysis. The argument is that if the laws of a mandatory war still apply today, then the Code of Jewish Law should have included them. As we know, Rambam records many laws that apply only when the temple stands, whereas the Code of Jewish Law generally limits itself to laws relevant in the present era. Since the Code of Jewish Law does not discuss the laws of a mandatory war, they conclude that such a war cannot exist today.
Okay, so this is the second argument. The number one, in order to have a mandatory war, you need a king. We have no king today. We have no Sanhedrin, so therefore they can't be mandatory. Number two, another proof is that Maimonides is unique because he has codified all the 613 commandments in an orderly fashion. The Code of Jewish Law that we have only codified laws that are applicable today. In other words, laws that don't pertain to the Holy Temple. Because the Code of Jewish Law was written 800 years ago, whatever, 700, whatever was written after the temple was destroyed, the laws pertaining to the temple weren't part of the code of the day-to-day life. So the Code of Jewish Law didn't incorporate those laws, only incorporated what's important to know today, how to do today. Whereas Maimonides has all the laws. The laws of a mandatory war, the Code of Jewish Law doesn't have. Doesn't say it. Maimonides has it because it has all the commandments. But the Code of Jewish Law doesn't include those laws. So they prove, that's their proof, that today there is no category of a mandatory war. And therefore, again, saying how could the Rebbe praise and say that the IDF soldiers are at such a holy level because they're fighting a mandatory war and they have Hashem's protection. They were looking down on them, said that they're not fighting a mandatory war. It's not a mitzvah war. It's nothing. We don't even have to respect them. Okay? So the Rebbe obviously answers them. Let's see what the Rebbe says.
Answer. All the wars fought by the judges after Joshua are in the same category. First of all, if the definition of a mandatory war truly depends on the appointment of a king, then we arrive at a very puzzling conclusion. The first king of Israel was Saul. According to Rambam, however, Joshua also had the legal status of a king, and so did Moshe.
Okay, so the first king was Saul, and there was Moshe and Joshua also were like a king, okay?
One might try to argue that because the
1 second, and I think we skipped again by mistake. Listen up, I'll read it, okay? I'll read it because it's missing.
okay.
Sorry for this constant back and forth. Go. If so, then every war fought after Joshua's death until Saul was crowned king, a period during which Israel was led not by kings but by judges, would have to be excluded from the category of mandatory war, war of mitzvah. That would include much of the conquest of the land of Israel, beginning with the verse after the death of Joshua. Judah said to his brother Simeon, "Come up with me and let us fight against the Canaanites." Joshua conquered a big part of Israel, but there's a lot of parts of Israel that weren't conquered. And Hashem said, after you conquered a big part, it's time for you to die, and the Jews will continue conquering. Conquering Israel is, according to all opinions, a mitzvah. But they did it without Joshua, because Joshua died, which means that they had no king. And yet, they still continue conquering it. There's many stories in the book of Joshua, you could read it there, whatever, but they were conquering land. Judah turned to his brother Simeon, and then they were all conquering their own land on their own. But this was all considered a mandatory war because it was in order to get the full parameters of Israel to the Jewish people. There was no king. So the Rebbe is saying your whole complaint that there has to be a king. We see in history that there were times that Jews were conquering Israel and it was a mandatory war, yet there was no king. Okay, let's continue. One might try.
One might try to argue that because the conquest of the land began under Joshua, who had the status of king, or the subsequent campaigns to complete the conquest retained the status of a mandatory war. Even if we accept that argument, we would still have to say that the wars fought in the days of Deborah and Jephthah were not mandatory wars. That conclusion runs contrary to the plain and obvious understanding of those events.
You could start saying that, yeah, the wars in the beginning that were a continuation of Joshua were a mandatory war because Joshua was the king. But like we said, there's wars that happened in the next 500 years that there was no king and the Jews were fighting them. And we always looked at it as mandatory wars. So very strange to say that this is a prerequisite. Okay. The same difficulty.
The same difficulty arises with the wars of the Hasmoneans. Although they served as kings, they were not descendants of King David, and they had not been anointed by a prophet. Therefore, they did not possess the legal status of the kings. According to this argument, their wars also could not be classified as a commanded war.
So the whole war of Hanukkah, according to this, wouldn't be considered a war of mitzvah. Could we say that the war of Hanukkah is not a war of mitzvah? Of course it is. So we have to figure it out. But now the Rebbe is going to say a whole different point, that when it says a war of mitzvah, there's two different types of war of mitzvahs. There's a war of mitzvah that talks about in Torah where it's conquering Israel from its enemies to establish its borders. That's one type of war of mitzvah. And over there is where Maimonides talks about that you need a king in order to do it. And even there, the Rebbe questions the whole parameters. But then there's another type of war of mitzvah. And that is if there's enemies attacking Jewish people and you go and fend off the enemies, that is, according to all opinions, a war of mitzvah. Now, there's no question about it that the 6-Day War and October 7th War and all these wars are definitely the Jews fending off the enemies, right? They're looking to annihilate us and we're fending them off. It has nothing to do with the borders of Israel, the land of Israel. This has to do with enemies attacking Jewish people. And that's for sure a war of mitzvah, according to all opinions. So let's see that inside. I think I'll continue a little bit.
Now, a war in which participation is a mitzvah. Now to the primary point. When we spoke of a milchemes mitzvah, a mandatory war, we were not referring to the technical legal classification with all of its specific requirements. Rather, we meant a war in which is itself a mitzvah, namely a war fought to defend the Jewish people. As Rambam defines it, what is a mandatory war? It includes coming to the aid of Israel against an enemy that attacks them. That obligation clearly does not depend on the appointment of a king.
Right? So even if you're going to say that all that we spoke before, the wars after the time of Joshua and the Hashmonaim and Hanukkah, and all those wars aren't a typical mitzvah war where it's to conquer the land of Israel and you need a king. Let's say, but that's not what the Rebbe was talking about anyways. The Rebbe clarifies here, I was talking about a mitzvah to defend the Jewish people. And that's this war. It's a war to defend the Jewish people.
Indeed, this law appears not only in Rambam, but also in the Code of Jewish Law, in the laws of Shabbos. If non-Jews besiege Jewish towns, we confront them with weapons and violate Shabbat in order to defend against them. It is a mitzvah for every Jew who is able to come to the aid of their brothers who are under siege and rescue them from the attackers, even on Shabbos.
If they come to attack us on Shabbos, we have a mitzvah to go out, not just the people from that city, but all the other cities, and go and fend off the attackers. That's a mitzvah. And we said before that Code of Jewish Law only brings things that are relevant today. Code of Jewish Law brings this mitzvah. Then on Shabbos, you got to go out to fight, right? Because that is a mitzvah, and that's what the Rebbe said. That's what I meant. I was talking about this war of mitzvah that's essential to protect the Jewish people. Okay, Mark, if you want to continue, let's read from Maimonides in the Code of Jewish Law where it talks about this.
When non-Jews besiege Jewish towns, we must confront them with weapons and violate Shabbat in order to defend against them. If the town is located near the border, then even if they come only for hay and straw, Shabbat may be violated on their account, lest they capture the town, and this will make it easier for them to conquer the rest of the land.
Okay, so it's an interesting law that even if they're coming and they're saying, listen, we're not here to attack you, we just need hay and straw, which they don't rightfully deserve, but they're whatever. They're gangs and they want hay and straw. We go and attack them to defend ourselves, even for hay and straw, if it's a border city. Because a border city is so strategic for the protection and security of the land, they might use it as an excuse to start fighting over hay and straw, they can get into the land. In other words, on Shabbos, if it's another city inside, and it's not such a vital city, so okay, if it's just hay and straw, give them the hay and straw and let them go off. But if it's a border city, even on Shabbat, you go and attack them and you fend them off, even just for hay and straw. Okay, let's see this from Maimonides.
When non-Jews lay siege to Jewish cities, if their intent is to harm Jewish lives, or if they engage in battle with a city or lay siege to it without stating a specific intention, we must wage war against them, and the Shabbos laws should be violated for this. It is a mitzvah for every Jew who is able to come to the aid of their brothers who are under siege and rescue them from their attackers, even on Shabbat. It is forbidden to delay until Saturday night.
By the way, in October 7th, that's exactly what happened. It was on the Chag, it was on the holiday, and many religious Jews, jumped into their cars, jumped into whatever they needed, and went to fend off the attack, right? Because that is what we consider a mitzvah. So this is the first thing that the Jews that were after the 6-Day War weren't happy with the victory. And when the Rebbe spoke how tremendous the victory is, and we have to thank Hashem, and we have to put the IDF on pedestals, how special and holy they are, they said, well, there's not even a war of mitzvah. The Rebbe said, you missed the point. It is a war of mitzvah. It might not be the war of mitzvah of conquering the land of Israel, but it's definitely a war of Israel to protect the Jewish people. And they did a huge mitzvah, and for that they get all the reward that they get. We'll talk about another one of their complaints, why we shouldn't give so much attention to the IDF. Again, I'll tell you outside and then we'll learn inside. They basically claimed, and they said that the IDF is using it as an ego thing. In other words, they're not acknowledging it was Hashem's victory. They're saying it's our victory. And that's idol worship. When you, as Jewish people, when we win a war, we have to thank Hashem. When we think ourselves instead of thanking Hashem, it's bad. And they said, therefore, we can't participate in the celebration of this war because people are denying Hashem in the celebration. So the Rebbe again addresses this as saying, even though obviously it's a problem that they're not, bringing in Hashem and acknowledging Hashem, but that doesn't take away from the miracle that we have to acknowledge. And let's read inside. Before we go inside, anyone has any questions that you want to clarify just before we continue? Everything good, clear? All right. Mark, I'll let you continue a bit. One second. This is an interesting law. You can read it.
After they have rescued their fellow Jews, they may return home with their weapons on Shabbat, so that they won't hesitate to come again should such a situation arise in the future.
This is an interesting law that not only allowed to go to war, they're allowed to return home. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to carry. So not only they're allowed to take their cars and their weapons and go to war, they're allowed to take their cars and weapons and go back home after the war is over. Why? Because if they can't, next time they say, we lost our car got stolen because we had to leave it there. Torah says, go home with your car. Go home with everything. That way you won't hesitate to do it again. When me and Anton went to New York together, we saw over there the Jewish voluntary ambulance, that they have a special ambulance they volunteer. And when you over here, another week I had to call the ambulance for my son, and we ended up canceling because we figured it out, but it took them like, I don't know, 13 minutes, and after 13 minutes they said they're still 6 minutes away. So they're talking about like 15, 18 minutes to get an ambulance. In these Jewish communities, they have these Jewish volunteers, and within 90 seconds, someone's at your door. It's unbelievable. But they go take you to the hospital on Shabbat. But after they take you to the hospital, they drive the car back home. So why taking the hospital is an emergency. Why are you taking it back home? For the same reason. Because if you're not going to let them go back home, next week they're going to hesitate. The whole Shabbat was killed. I couldn't be home with my family. Therefore, they're allowed to drive back home, even though it's not an emergency, to protect. Okay. Mark, you want to continue?
The same applies to the claim that the results of this miraculous event have been used for undesirable purposes. Regarding the sin of the golden calf.
Okay, right. So this is already the explanation. The Rebbe is saying because they use the miraculous event as promoting themselves and forgetting about Hashem, therefore we can't what's it called? We can't promote it. We can't endorse it. Okay.
Regarding the sin of the golden calf, the root and source of all the subsequent sins, a well-known question is asked. How could the Jewish people commit such a grave sin immediately after receiving the Torah?
You just got the Torah. How could they do such a bad sin?
One explanation found in the Midrash is that when Hashem descended upon Mount Sinai to give the Torah, he was accompanied by the divine chariot. The Jewish people saw the image of the face of the ox within the chariot, became fascinated by it, and later fashioned the golden calf in its likeness. When I came to Mount Sinai to give them the Torah, I descended in my heavenly chariot. They gazed upon it, chose one of its images, and later provoked me with it.
Okay. So we know that Hashem it says Ezekiel describes us the chariot of Hashem, and in the chariot there's 4 different images. And it says when Hashem came down in this metaphorical image, and the Jews saw the image of an ox, and they got sort of excited or inspired or whatever by this image, and that's what sort of caused them later to make the golden calf, right? So the Rebbe is bringing this to say that, where did the sin of the golden calf come from? It wasn't like it wasn't just like a random occurrence. It came from the giving of the Torah. The giving of the Torah sort of made way for Jews to sin the golden calf because the revelation was so awesome and so great by the giving of the Torah. That's where the Jews learned about this concept of a calf, and that's when they served it. So someone's gonna maybe come and say, since they misuse the giving of the Torah, maybe Hashem shouldn't have given the Torah, or maybe we should condemn the whole giving of the Torah because it led them to serve idols. Obviously, no one's gonna say such a stupid thing. The giving of the Torah was tremendous. It was a huge revelation, the greatest thing ever happened, and some people used it in the wrong way. That doesn't take away from the awesomeness of the giving of the Torah. The same thing the Rebbe is going to explain, that the same thing, the 6-day war was the tremendous miracle. People used it in the wrong way and wanted to do self-promotion and deny Hashem. That's a problem. We have to deal with it. But that doesn't take away from the awesome miracle that happened. Lior, if you want to continue reading.
The Rebbe. Thus, the divine revelation on Mount Sinai ultimately led to the gravest of sins, the sin of the golden calf. Indeed, we are still suffering its consequences. As the verse states, on the day that I call them to account, I will call them to account, which the sages explain to mean that no punishment ever comes upon the Jewish people without including some measure of retribution for the sin of the golden calf. But would anyone suggest that because the revelation at Sinai was later misused, its immense significance should somehow be diminished? After all, through that revelation, accompanied by the divine chariot, the barrier separating the spiritual and physical worlds was forever removed. The same principle applies here. Should should God have withheld the revelation of the divine chariot simply because some foolish people, overcome by misguided thinking, later misused it? Similarly, Hashem enables humanity to benefit physically from the sun and the moon. Should he deprive the world of those benefits merely because some people foolishly worship the sun and the moon?
Right? You know that back in the day, people worship the sun and the moon. So should Hashem take it away from us? No, we're thankful for Hashem giving us the sun and the moon. And there's some people that misuse it, right? It's the same thing with everything that just because people took the Six-Day War and started saying my strength and the might of my hand have brought me this success, and they forgot about Hashem, it's terrible. But we shouldn't celebrate the miracle of the war. We shouldn't use the sun and the moon. We all use the sun and the moon. There are people that worship it, right? We all learned the Torah. The Torah, giving of the Torah led to some bad occurrences that we suffer till today. But do we not acknowledge the greatness of the giving of the Torah? That's the way the world is. We have an evil inclination, and we make mistakes, and that's part of life. But we can't get confused and lose our sight, and that it's all, throw it all out the window. The victory of the Six-Day War is the greatest victory, and we have to celebrate and realize how holy and special the soldiers in the IDF are, that they protected the rest of Israel from an attack that would have annihilated them. Right? So here the Rebbe answered the two questions, or two of the questions they had. Number one, how could you call it a war of mitzvah if there's no king? The Rebbe said this is the war. First of all, the Rebbe said in history we find other wars fought without kings, but more importantly, the war that you need kings for is to conquer the actual land of Israel. The Six-Day War wasn't a war of conquering the land of Israel, even though they conquered some of the land. It was to fend off the enemy, and that, according to all opinions, is a mitzvah. And number two, the fact that people used it in the wrong way as an self-centered ego thing, to say it's my strength and forgetting about Hashem. Obviously, that's not good. But again, it doesn't take away from the miracle. Okay, Anthony, if you want to continue.
The practical lesson from the recent war is clear. It makes no difference whether it fits the technical legal definition of a mandatory war, what caused it, or what consequences followed from it. The only proper way to evaluate the situation is through the perspective of the Torah. From that perspective, it is obvious that the Jewish people were in a situation that required coming to the aid of Israel against an enemy attacking them. This did not involve merely one Jew or a smaller group, but a very large portion of the Jewish people living in the Holy Land, a land upon which the eyes of the Lord your God are always fixed, from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. According to Rambam, there must always be Jews living in the land of Israel. Moreover, what happened there affected the entire Jewish people throughout the world. It is equally clear that the salvation came about in a miraculous manner, beyond the ordinary course of nature. Therefore, we should reflect upon these events and thank Hashem for his great miracles, as Rashi writes at the beginning of this week's Torah portion. They serve to make the kindness of the Almighty known.
Right? We have to realize that Hashem did it, and be thankful to Hashem. And that's it. Celebrate Hashem's miracles. Don't get caught up in the details that something went wrong here and they don't believe in Hashem here. These are problems, but don't lose focus on the tremendous miracle that Hashem gave you, right? It's like if someone was, sometimes if one of the kids get a gift, right? So sometimes other kids are a little jealous and they'll start fighting, right? So do you not say thank you to the person who gave you the gift because the kids were jealous for 5 minutes? It's not good that the kids were jealous, and you have to work on that. But the gift was a tremendous gift. Hashem gave us a gift. The Six-Day War was a gift, the victory, right? So some kids we got a little, naughty and then didn't think Hashem probably fine. So it's a problem. Deal with it. But but heaven forbid to lose focus. Okay.
Should a new holiday be established? Hashem forbid to establish a new holiday with the recitation of Hallel and the like. It is forbidden to add new festivals. The same is true of the 12th of Tammuz. The previous rabbi described it as the festival of the redemption of Israel, writing, "It was not only me whom Hashem redeemed on the 12th of Tammuz, but all who cherish our holy Torah, all who observe its mitzvot, and even everyone who bears the name of Israel." Yet no one ever suggested reciting Hallel on that day, even without a blessing.
Okay, so some people wanted to make it the day of the 6 Day War into a holiday, and the Rebbe said you're not allowed to make it into a holiday. Holiday is something that is a biblical thing and something, Hanukkah and Purim, but otherwise we don't make it a holiday. Even the 12th day of Tammuz, which is a huge celebration, we have to thank Hashem, but you can't make it into a holiday where you say the Hallel. That's something that we don't have the right to do. So, the Rebbe was addressing some communities, the modern Orthodox in Israel, they wanted to make a holiday. The Rebbe said that you're not allowed to do either. It's a miracle. It's a celebration. We have to say thank you to Hashem. But the way we say thank you is not by making it a holiday, because that we don't have the authority to do. Okay?
Rather, it is a personal festival, similar to the practice of various great Jewish leaders who established a special day of thanksgiving for themselves and their families after experiencing a miracle. The purpose of such a day is to reflect on the miracle, thank Hashem for his kindness, and above all, use it as an opportunity for renewed commitment to Torah and mitzvot. As the previous rabbi himself wrote concerning the 12th of Tammuz, it should be established as a day of gathering together and awakening ourselves to strengthen Torah and Judaism.
Right. So the previous Rebbe said to use that day to inspire ourselves to talk, but it can't be a holiday because only Hashem can make a holiday. Well, too late. That's 1 second. Okay. Mark, if you want to continue.
Two life lessons from the military. The same applies to these recent events. Besides thanking Hashem for his kindness, they should inspire greater dedication to Torah and mitzvah. For example, as discussed at the previous Farbrengen, divine providence arranged for these festivals to occur close to the festival of Shavuot, commemorating the giving of the Torah. This teaches us something about receiving the Torah every day, as reflected in the daily blessing that praises Hashem as the giver of the Torah, using the present tense. The first lesson is the principle of placing action before understanding. We will do and we will hear. This is a foundational principle of military discipline.
Right, so we have to, like everything, this is right around the giving of the Torah. So we have to learn lessons from it. And one of the lessons is when Hashem wanted to give us the Torah, we said we will do, and only afterwards we will understand. As Jews, we always like to understand, which is good. But traditionally, to our history, the way it all started is we told Hashem first we'll do, and we'll ask questions later. And that's the true way to be a Jew. The true way to follow Hashem is not to understand. First, you have to do. And when you do, you'll understand. And you have to try to understand, but only after you do. And that happens in an army. In an army, you can't ask questions, right? When there's war going on, there's no questions. You listen. That's the first thing. That's the most important thing. And it's a very strong principle in Judaism, because someone just asked me, how do I feel Hashem? You can study as much as you want. In order to feel Hashem, you have to do what Hashem wants you to do. That's what you got to do. And that's then in an army, you have exactly that. Okay, number 2. B.
The second lesson is mutual responsibility. All Jews are responsible for one another. The conduct of every individual affects the entire Jewish people. As Maimonides rules, a single action by one person can tip the balance for himself and for the entire world toward merit, or, Hashem forbid, the opposite. This was something we observed with our own eyes. There was no need for arguments or persuasion. everyone understood that if a person failed to guard his own position, he was endangering not only himself, but also his fellow soldiers and ultimately the entire Jewish people.
Beautiful, right? So there's this mutual responsibility that it's not like, oh, you know, I have to fend off the enemy to come fight my house. It's not my house. This is all of our houses, right? If I let the enemy into my house, they're going to come into all the houses and attack the entire land of Israel. And this is the mutual responsibility that we have to each other, that we have to be better people, do what Hashem wants us to do. It's not just, well, you know, if I don't, I'm going to hurt myself. When we, just like in the war, if you let them in, you're letting them attack the whole Israel. When we don't follow Hashem's mitzvahs, Hashem's commandments, follow Hashem, we're not just hurting ourselves, we're hurting everyone around us. So this is I hope this clarified things a little bit, besides being very interesting, just clarify that. I just sort of summarize that there's no question that in other words, in Israel, the mistakes on both sides. The IDF doesn't respect people studying Torah. They don't respect it. They don't think it's such a crucial part. And that we see clearly that it is a crucial part. At the same time, the ultra-Orthodox in Israel don't respect properly the value of the soldiers. And the Rebbe over here puts them on a pedestal, how holy and special the soldiers are, that they're fighting the wars of Hashem and protecting the Jewish people. And the Rebbe had tremendous respect and admiration for the soldiers, because they literally gave up their lives for protecting the Jewish people, which someone that goes on self-sacrifice to protect the Jewish people, there's really nothing greater than them. This is something that we all have to learn, is to respect each other, right? To be able to see, not just to see the flaws in the other person. It's very easy to see flaws in another person, but to be able to see the virtues in the other person, the good parts in the other person. The more we see the goodness in the other person, the more we'll be able to connect and come to similar grounds of agreeing and living together peacefully. Thank you all for joining. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. It was good to see you, and God willing, with Hashem's help, next week. All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.